The morning sun spread a soft glow across the airbase, lighting up the silver bodies of fighter jets parked in perfect formation. The air carried that familiar scent of fuel and metal, mixed with a faint chill that came just before takeoff hours. Ground crews moved quickly between planes, their orange vests flashing under the sunlight, while mechanics checked every bolt, wire, and tire before the day's exercise began. It was a busy day, the kind that made everyone on base alert and alive. Among the usual sound of engines warming up and radios crackling, a quiet figure walked across the runway. She moved with calm steps, her posture straight, eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses. Her flight suit was plain, nothing fancy. No badges that stood out, no visible rank on her chest. She looked like just another pilot, except there was something about her silence that made her presence feel different. She didn't rush. She didn't try to talk to anyone. She simply observed, like someone who had been here many times before. At the edge of the hangar, a small group of F-22 pilots gathered. They were loud, confident, and teasing each other as usual before training began. These were some of the best, men and women who had flown hundreds of hours and carried the pride of being elite. When the quiet woman passed them, a few glanced in her direction. One whispered to another, asking who she was. No one knew. "She's probably from the communications team," one of them said casually, half paying attention. "Maybe logistics," another replied. "She doesn't look like a pilot," someone added with a small laugh. They went back to their talk, never imagining that she had more flight hours than all of them combined. Inside the main briefing room, the energy was loud and restless. The pilots filled the seats, chatting, sipping coffee, waiting for instructions. The quiet woman entered without saying a word, took an empty seat near the back, and placed her helmet gently on the table in front of her. A few looked back again, still curious. She didn't seem nervous, but she didn't seem overly confident either. Just calm, like someone who already knew exactly what was coming. When the commanding officer walked in, the room quickly went silent. Everyone sat up straight. He started the briefing, his tone sharp and focused. The mission was a training exercise, a simulated air combat scenario to test reaction times and teamwork under pressure. It wasn't unusual, but it was challenging enough to make even experienced pilots pay attention. The officer pointed to the board showing the formation and mission plan. 6 F-22s would take part, split into 2 teams. The goal was to practice offensive and defensive maneuvers against a highly skilled opponent. What no one expected was who that opponent would be. Halfway through the briefing, the commanding officer called for roll. One by one, pilots responded with their call signs: Falcon 2, Razor 3, Ghost 4. Each name carried pride, reputation, and history within the squadron. Then the officer paused, looking down at his sheet before reading the next one. Viper 1, he said. The quiet woman lifted her head and answered clearly, "Ready, sir." The room froze. For a moment, no one spoke. Even the low hum of the projector seemed louder than usual. "Viper 1, one of the pilots whispered, almost to himself. That call sign wasn't random. Everyone had heard it before. Stories told around bases usually beginning with, "You ever heard about that pilot who," followed by tales of impossible maneuvers and record-breaking missions. But that pilot was supposed to be someone legendary, maybe retired, maybe even a myth. Surely it couldn't be her. The commanding officer didn't explain. He simply continued the briefing like nothing unusual had happened. But from that moment on, no one in the room could focus completely. The pilots stole quick glances toward the back, trying to match the calm face of the quiet woman to the stories they'd heard. Her expression didn't change. She listened, nodded, took notes. Not a single word came from her unless required. When the briefing ended, the pilots filed out to the locker room to prepare. The same chatter returned, and though this time it was quieter, almost uncertain. A few whispered theories. Some thought maybe she just shared the same call sign by coincidence. Others joked nervously that it couldn't really be that Viper 1. Outside, the engines of the F-22s began to roar again, signaling the start of pre-flight checks. The woman walked toward her assigned jet, her steps even and steady. She ran her hand slowly along the aircraft's side. A small gesture, but it said a lot. It wasn't admiration. It was familiarity. She had done this 1,000 times before. The crew chief walked up, clipboard in hand. "All systems green," he said with respect in his tone. She nodded once, gave a quiet "thank you," and began her climb into the cockpit. The sunlight hit her helmet just as she pulled it on, reflecting a sharp glint across the jet's nose. The rest of the squadron was watching now. No one said anything, but curiosity had turned into something else, a strange mix of doubt and anticipation. Inside her jet, she moved with smooth, practiced precision. Her hands knew exactly where every switch was. She didn't look around or hesitate. The radio crackled to life with the sound of other pilots checking in. Falcon 2, ready. Razor 3, ready. Ghost 4, ready. Each call came in with the usual energy, a bit of bravado, a bit of excitement. Then came her voice, calm, firm, and steady. Viper 1, ready for takeoff. The tower cleared them for launch. One by one, the jets taxied to the runway. The ground shook as engines roared louder. A moment later, they shot into the sky, sleek, silver shapes slicing through the morning clouds. From the ground, they looked like streaks of light chasing each other across the blue. But inside the cockpits, it was pure focus, heartbeats syncing with the rhythm of flight, eyes scanning radar screens, ears tuned to every radio call. The quiet woman's jet flew slightly behind the rest, maintaining perfect formation. She didn't rush to get ahead. She didn't show off. She just stayed right where she needed to be. But the few who noticed her flight path couldn't help but see the precision. Every small correction, every movement, smooth like a practiced dance. A young pilot flying nearby glanced over and said softly through the radio, "Hey, she's flying tight." "Real tight," his teammate laughed. "Relax, she'll fall behind once we start the maneuvers." But deep down, they weren't as sure anymore. As they reached altitude, the squadron leader's voice came through. "All right, team. Standard training engagement. 2 groups. Simulate combat pattern Bravo. Watch your spacing and timing. We're testing coordination under pressure. Let's do this clean." "Copy that," the voices replied one after another. The quiet woman's voice came last, calm as always. "Copy." High above the desert, the jets spread out, streaking across the endless sky. The sunlight reflected off their wings as they prepared for the first pass. Everything was running smoothly. The pilots were confident, sharp, ready to prove themselves. But what none of them realized yet was that this exercise would become a story they'd tell for years, because of the woman who sat quietly that morning, saying almost nothing, while everyone underestimated her. Down below near the hangars, a few technicians and officers stood watching the dots moving on radar screens. One of them noticed how precise one particular signal was moving, the one marked V1. He raised an eyebrow. "Who's flying that jet?" he asked. "Viper 1, came the reply. The man smiled slightly, shaking his head. "Oh, this should be interesting." In the sky, the jets looped into formation again, ready for their simulated combat. The radio went silent for a moment, that kind of silence that happens before something big. The young pilots took deep breaths, their adrenaline rising. Then the call came. "Engage," engines roared. Jets dived. The blue sky turned into a swirl of movement and speed. The F-22s darted and twisted, chasing each other in controlled chaos. From the ground, it looked like art. Inside the cockpits, it felt like electricity. And right there in the middle of it all, the quiet woman moved her jet with an ease that didn't seem possible. Her radar locked, released, repositioned, smooth, silent. Perfect, the others didn't know it yet. But they were about to experience something that would make them question everything they thought they knew about flying. As the sky filled with motion and shouts over the radio, one thing became clear. The quiet woman wasn't here to observe. She was here to fly. The first few minutes of the exercise went just as the squadron expected. The F-22s broke into 2 teams and began moving through the sky like arrows. Their radios were full of chatter, short clipped words and laughter that came from pilots who were used to winning. The woman known as Viper 1 didn't say much. Her radio stayed quiet except for the occasional confirmation. Her focus was absolute. The rules of the mock fight were clear. The objective was to outmaneuver the opponent and tag them electronically using the onboard training system. Every tag registered on the radar back at the base. The idea was to test strategy, coordination, and reflexes. It was meant to be a challenge, not a competition. But for the young pilots, every drill was a chance to prove they were the best. At first, they treated her like just another player in the simulation. 2 jets turned toward her position, planning to trap her between them in a pincer move. One would push from the front, the other would slide behind. It was a simple tactic, one they had practiced many times. But Viper 1 didn't react the way they expected. Instead of breaking left or diving down, she slowed slightly, letting them get closer, almost too close. Then with a sharp pull of her controls, she rolled upward, twisted through their flight paths, and reappeared behind both of them in a perfect tailing position. Her voice came through the radio, calm and direct. "Tag 1. Tag 2. 2 lights blinked on the radar back at the base, confirming her hits. The pilots who had just been shot down went silent for a second, stunned. One of them finally spoke, half laughing in disbelief. "How did she—" "I didn't even see her move." Their flight leader, still high above, tried to stay focused. "All right, everyone tighten up. She's fast, but don't lose formation. Watch your spacing. Keep your comms clear." But their formation didn't stay tight for long. Viper 1 moved through the sky with a precision none of them had seen before. She wasn't just fast, she was unpredictable. Every time they tried to corner her, she slipped out like water through fingers. One moment she was below them, the next she appeared above their radar arcs. It was like she could read their moves before they made them. The chatter over the radio changed tone. Gone were the jokes and easy confidence. Now there was tension, disbelief, even a touch of frustration. "She's behind me again," one shouted. "Where did she go?" "I lost her on radar," another called out. "Someone get eyes on Viper 1. But every time someone thought they spotted her, she vanished again. From the control tower, the officers watching the radar couldn't help but exchange impressed looks. One leaned toward another and whispered, "She's toying with them." The squadron leader, still determined to keep the exercise under control, switched strategies. "Everyone regroup. We'll run a coordinated sweep. 3 on defense, 3 on offense. Don't chase her alone, it was a smart call. Alone, no one could match her reflexes. But together, they might corner her." The sky turned into a dance of silver wings and roaring engines. The 6 F-22s moved like a web, trying to catch one jet that refused to be caught. They forced her higher, closer to the clouds. The plan almost worked. Almost. At the last second, Viper 1 pulled a move that made even the controller on the ground mutter in disbelief. She cut her engines for a split second, letting gravity drop her below their formation, then reignited the thrust, climbing back up from underneath their radar coverage. In that moment of confusion, she locked onto 3 of them in quick succession. Tag 3. Tag 4. Tag 5. Her voice was calm as ever, no trace of excitement or pride. Back at the base, the radar lit up again. 3 more hits confirmed. The control room fell silent for a heartbeat. Then a low whistle came from one of the technicians. On the radio, one of the pilots sighed. "Okay, that's impossible." But it wasn't. It was skill, years of training, instinct, and a kind of focus that didn't come from showing off. It came from knowing exactly what the aircraft could do and trusting it completely. The squadron leader decided to step in personally. He was one of the most respected pilots in the unit, steady, experienced, and not easily shaken. "All right, Viper 1, he said through the radio with a hint of challenge. "You and me now." There was a short pause. Then her reply came, soft but confident. "Copy that." The others pulled back to observe. The sky felt still again, quiet except for the faint hum of engines circling high above. 2 dots, 2 jets, lined up across the horizon, facing each other at distance. Then, like a signal had been given, both aircraft shot forward. The maneuvering that followed was breathtaking. They weaved through clouds, rolled, and twisted in every direction. The F-22s were fast, built for agility and stealth, and both pilots used them to the limit. The squadron leader made sharp cuts trying to gain position, but she was always one step ahead. Every turn he made, she anticipated. Every climb he attempted, she countered with perfect timing. At one point, he managed to get behind her, locking radar for a split second. Before he could confirm the tag, she inverted her jet, dove, then pulled up so sharply that she came out behind him again. Her voice came over the channel, steady as ever. Tag 6, and that was it. The entire squadron had been tagged. There was silence on the radio. No one spoke for several seconds. The leader's laugh finally broke the tension, a short, genuine laugh of respect. "Well," he said, "remind me never to underestimate you again." Back at the base, when the jets landed one by one, the crews and officers gathered around. The ground trembled as the engines powered down. The first pilot climbed out of his jet and pulled off his helmet, still shaking his head in disbelief. "She took all of us out," he muttered, half smiling. Another added, "I didn't even see her on radar half the time." "How's that possible?" When Viper 1's jet touched down, it rolled smoothly to a stop. She opened the canopy, the sunlight hitting her face as she lifted off her helmet. She wasn't smiling, just calm, like someone who'd done what she came to do. As she stepped down, the squadron leader walked over to meet her. He extended his hand with a grin. "That was impressive," he said simply. She shook his hand and nodded. "Good teamwork out there," she replied. Her tone was kind, not arrogant. Around them, the younger pilots exchanged quiet glances. Their earlier jokes felt silly now. They had seen skill like that only in stories, and now it was standing right in front of them. Inside the debriefing room, the large screen showed playback footage from the exercise. The group watched silently as the simulation replayed every move. The lines on the radar looked like art, clean, deliberate, precise. Every motion from her jet seemed perfectly timed. There were no wasted movements, no panic, no hesitation. "Look at this turn," one of the instructors said, pointing at the screen. "That's an energy bleed roll. Only a few pilots can pull that off without losing control." Another added, "She must have been reading their vectors in advance. Look here, she predicted their flight path before they even adjusted." The room filled with murmurs of admiration. Even the squadron leader leaned back, crossing his arms, studying the screen with quiet respect. When the playback ended, the commanding officer finally spoke.
"That," he said, "was a reminder of why we never judge by appearances."
Every pilot here just learned something valuable today. Viper 1 sat quietly through the praise, not saying much. She didn't look proud. She looked thoughtful. After the meeting, as the others filed out, a few pilots stopped by her seat to say quick words of respect. "Ma'am, that was incredible. I've never seen anyone fly like that. Can you teach us that roll you did?" She smiled gently. "It's not about the roll," she said. "It's about understanding what your plane is telling you. When you stop fighting it and start listening, it'll do more than you expect." They nodded, taking in every word. As the evening sun dipped behind the mountains, the base grew quiet again. The jets sat in their hangars, still warm from the day's flights. Most of the pilots had gone to rest, but a few stayed behind, replaying the events in their minds. In the distance, the woman who had shocked them all walked along the runway once more. Her steps were slow, thoughtful. The orange light of sunset reflected off the plains, and the wind carried a soft hum from the cooling engines. She paused, looking up at the fading sky. For her, flying wasn't about pride or reputation, it was about peace. The sky had always been the one place where everything made sense. Tomorrow would bring another day, another set of challenges. But for now, she was content. The lesson had already begun to settle in for everyone who'd watched her fly, that real mastery doesn't need noise, and true confidence speaks quietly. The next morning came early at the base. The sky was a soft mix of orange and blue, and the air was still cool from the night. Inside the hangars, technicians were already at work checking the aircraft. The sound of tools clicking, metal clanging, and radio chatter filled the space. Everyone moved with purpose, but there was a quiet buzz around the base that hadn't been there before. People were still talking about the flight from the day before, about the pilot who had shown up quietly and then defeated the entire F-22 squadron. The story had spread faster than anyone expected. Even those who hadn't seen the exercise firsthand had already heard the details. Some believed it, some doubted it, but everyone was curious about her. When she walked through the hangar that morning, conversations paused for a few seconds. Mechanics nodded respectfully. Pilots straightened their postures. She didn't make a scene or seek attention. She just gave a polite smile and continued walking toward the briefing room. Inside, the atmosphere felt different. The same group of pilots who had been so confident and casual before were now quieter, more focused. When she entered, a few looked up from their notes and nodded to her. There was no teasing this time, no joking, just respect. The commanding officer stepped into the room shortly after. His expression was serious but proud. Yesterday's exercise, he began, was meant to test coordination and discipline. What we got instead was a lesson, one that none of us will forget soon. He looked around the room, then at her. Viper 1, you showed us what experience looks like when it's combined with calm control. Today we're going to build on that. She gave a small nod. Understood, sir. The day's training would be different. Instead of a mock dogfight, it would focus on group strategy and communication. The goal was to learn how to react under pressure without losing teamwork. Viper 1 wasn't there to compete this time. She was there to help guide them. During the briefing, she didn't interrupt or take over. She listened, waited until the officer finished, and then quietly offered a few suggestions. When you lose radar contact, don't panic, she said. The first instinct is to chase. Don't. Stay coordinated. Trust your team's angles. Her voice was calm and steady, every word simple but confident. The younger pilots took notes quickly, realizing that what she said carried weight. Once the briefing ended, they all moved out toward the runway again. The jet stood ready, engines gleaming in the sunlight. The air shimmered slightly with heat as they prepared to take off. Before boarding, one of the younger pilots approached her. He had been among the first ones she had tagged in the last exercise. "Ma'am," he said shyly, "I just wanted to say, yesterday I learned more in 10 minutes watching you than I did in months of training." She smiled gently. "That's good. Learning is what flying's about. Every flight teaches something new, and even for me." He nodded, encouraged by her tone. "Do you ever get nervous?" he asked quietly. Her answer came without hesitation. "Always," she said. "But the difference is I don't let it decide for me." The young pilot thought about that for a moment before heading toward his jet. Soon, the engines roared again, shaking the ground. The jets rolled onto the runway, and one by one they lifted into the air. From the ground, the sight was breathtaking. 7 F-22s rising together, their wings glinting like silver blades under the bright sun. Up in the sky, the formation was tighter this time. The chatter on the radio was cleaner, more focused. The pilots were trying hard to apply what she had taught. They practiced formation changes, target tracking, and radar coordination. Every time someone slipped out of rhythm, her voice came through the radio. Calm, guiding, never harsh. Don't chase. Hold position. Adjust your altitude 2 degrees. There, now you're balanced. Trust your wingman. You're not flying alone. Her tone carried authority but also understanding, the kind of voice that didn't need to shout to be heard. After an hour in the air, the group was flying smoother than they ever had. The commanding officer monitoring from the control tower nodded in approval. "She's bringing out the best in them," he said quietly to one of the instructors. "It's not just her flying, it's her presence." When the session ended and the jets landed, the pilots gathered again in the debriefing room. Their faces were tired but satisfied. The tension that had filled the group before was gone, replaced by respect and curiosity. The officer asked her to share her thoughts. She stood near the board, hands clasped lightly in front of her. "You all did well today," she said. "But remember, speed isn't everything. It's about control. You can have all the power in the world, but if you can't stay calm when things go wrong, that power turns against you." She paused, looking around the room. "The sky doesn't forgive panic. It rewards patience and awareness. That's what keeps you alive out there." No one said a word. They just listened. After the meeting, she was invited to the pilot's lounge. It wasn't formal, just a few of them sitting together, drinking coffee, talking about flight stories. For the first time, she laughed with them. Her laughter was quiet but warm, and it made the group feel comfortable around her. One of the senior pilots asked her how she had gotten the call sign Viper 1. She smiled faintly. "It was a long time ago," she said. "Back when I was training with a test unit. During a low-visibility run, I pulled off a move that even surprised my instructor. He said I struck like a viper, silent until the moment mattered." The group chuckled, but there was admiration in their eyes. Another pilot leaned forward. "So you've been flying since before most of us joined?" "Long before," she said with a soft smile. "But the thing about flying is it doesn't matter how many years you've been doing it. The sky treats everyone the same. You make one mistake and it'll remind you you're not invincible." Her words hit them deeply. There was wisdom in her simplicity, something that came not from pride but from experience. Later that evening, as the sun began to set, she stood alone near the runway again. The sky turned orange and pink, and the sound of the last few jets echoed in the distance. She watched them disappear into the horizon, her eyes following the fading trails. Behind her, the squadron leader walked up quietly. "You know," he said, "I think they've learned more from you in 2 days than they did in 6 months." She turned slightly and smiled. Sometimes all people need is a different point of view, she said. They already had the skill. They just needed to see how to use it. He nodded, then asked softly, "Do you ever miss combat flying?" She was silent for a moment, then replied, "Sometimes, but not the danger, just the focus. Up there, everything makes sense. Down here, people talk too much." They both laughed quietly. The wind blew across the tarmac, carrying the faint hum of engines shutting down for the night. As the stars began to appear, the leader said, "We're lucky to have you here." They needed this, especially the young ones. They think speed and control are everything. You reminded them there's more to flying than that. She looked at the sky one last time before turning to leave. "Every pilot learns that lesson sooner or later," she said. "Some just have to see it happen to believe it." That night, the base was unusually quiet. Most of the pilots went to sleep early, their minds replaying the day's training and her words. Some wrote notes in their logbooks, others just lay in bed thinking about what she said, about patience, control, and trust. And somewhere in the stillness of the night, the story of Viper 1 continued to spread, not as a legend or a rumor this time, but as a lesson. The next morning, when the sun rose again over the hangars, everyone was ready before the alarms even sounded. They were eager not just to fly, but to learn. They had seen what real mastery looked like, and they wanted to get closer to it. From her window overlooking the runway, the quiet woman watched as the young pilots prepared their jets. A faint smile crossed her face. She remembered when she had been one of them, full of energy, thinking she could conquer the sky. And maybe in some ways she still could. But now she knew something deeper. The sky wasn't something to conquer. It was something to respect. The next few days at the base felt different from any training week before. Everyone moved with a new sense of purpose. The young pilots who once laughed easily before flight were now serious, focused, and eager to improve. They arrived early, studied their radar recordings, practiced maneuvers again and again. Something had changed in the atmosphere, and everyone knew who had brought that change. The woman they called Viper 1 had become the quiet center of attention, though she never sought it. She didn't walk around like someone important. She didn't give orders. She simply showed up, ready to fly, ready to help. But her calm confidence drew people to her. When she spoke, people listened. When she flew, they watched. And when she taught, they remembered every word. That morning, she stood near her jet, talking with a few crew members. The sunlight caught the silver of the plane's wings, and the faint sound of wind moved across the runway. One of the crew chiefs handed her a checklist, and she looked it over carefully. Every detail mattered to her, from the smallest bolt to the last line of code in the systems. "You check everything yourself?" A young mechanic asked curiously. She looked up and smiled. "Always," she said softly. "You can't control what happens in the sky, but you can make sure your aircraft is ready to handle it." Her tone wasn't commanding. It was gentle but firm. The mechanic nodded, realizing he'd just been given a lesson without even asking for one. Inside the hangar, the pilots were preparing for another advanced exercise. Today's mission was more complex, a multi-stage scenario involving coordination, target tracking, and simulated support requests. It was the kind of drill that tested every part of a pilot's discipline. The commanding officer called everyone together. "Yesterday we practiced communication and formation. Today we'll take that a step further. You'll be working as a full unit. Viper 1 will act as your lead controller in the sky." There were a few quick glances between pilots. It wasn't surprise this time, just quiet anticipation. They trusted her now, and they were ready to follow. When she entered the briefing room, she looked at each of them and said simply, "This isn't about who's best. It's about how well you work together. You already have the skills. All we need is timing and focus." She studied the tactical map for a moment before adding, "The sky can make you feel alone up there, but remember, you're never really alone. Stay linked. The second you start thinking it's every pilot for themselves, that's when mistakes happen." The pilots nodded. Her words were clear and steady, not dramatic but deeply real. When the briefing ended, they suited up, helmets under their arms, visors reflecting the light of the hangar. One by one, they headed toward their jets. The engines came alive again, growling across the airfield. Soon the sound became a single steady thunder. As they lifted off, the horizon opened wide. The base shrank beneath them, and the clouds stretched ahead like a soft road leading into endless blue. The jets climbed higher, forming into perfect alignment. The radio came alive. Calm, professional voices reporting positions. Falcon 2 holding steady. Ghost 3 on your left. Razor 4, altitude stable. Then came her voice. Viper 1 taking lead. Maintain distance. Let's move. Her tone was smooth and clear, the kind of voice that instantly gave direction without force. The group followed without hesitation. Up in the open sky, she guided them through each stage of the drill. Her instructions came at the right moments. Never too early, never too late. When the formation began to drift, she adjusted them gently. When one pilot made a risky turn, she corrected it with calm precision. Ease up. Don't force it. You're trying too hard, she said through the radio, her tone almost like a mentor rather than a commander. Let the jet work with you. The pilot listened, made the adjustment, and found the balance instantly. Copy that, came the reply, his voice steadier now. Back on the ground, officers watched the exercise unfold on radar screens. The movement of the jets was cleaner than ever. It was like watching a perfect pattern form in motion. Every plane where it needed to be. Every line smooth and deliberate. She's training them in real time, one officer said quietly. This isn't just a drill, it's a transformation. The commander nodded. She's doing what good leaders do. She's making everyone else better. Up in the air, the second phase of the mission began, simulated threats appearing on the radar. The pilots had to react quickly, communicate, and protect the formation. Her voice came over the radio, calm as always. Targets incoming from the east. Ghost 3, shift position 10 degrees. Razor 4, back him up. Falcon 2, you're my cover. Each instruction was clear, confident, and perfectly timed. The pilots followed, executing the move smoothly. Within minutes, they neutralized every simulated target without losing formation. When the final signal came through, mission complete. There was a pause in the air, followed by quiet laughter and cheers through the radio. The sense of teamwork was real, and for the first time, every pilot felt what it meant to fly as one. Back at the base, when the jets landed, the crew clapped as the pilot stepped out. The commanding officer smiled and said, "Now that's what I call a perfect flight." The younger pilots looked toward her, grateful. She gave a small smile and said simply, "You did the work. I just reminded you what you already knew." Later that afternoon, a small ceremony was held in the briefing hall. It wasn't planned, just a spontaneous show of appreciation. The commander stood at the front and said, "Sometimes we forget that experience is our greatest teacher." Viper 1 reminded us that skill isn't just about flying fast. It's about staying calm, thinking clearly, and trusting each other. He turned to her and added, "You came here quietly, but you've left a mark none of us will forget." The room filled with applause. She didn't make a big speech. She simply nodded and said, "Thank you. The sky teaches all of us, and I'm still learning too." That night, the base was alive with energy. The pilots gathered in small groups, replaying their flight footage, pointing out small victories, small mistakes. Laughter mixed with pride filled the room. They felt like a real team now, something they hadn't realized they were missing before. Outside, she sat alone near the edge of the runway, looking out at the lights flickering across the horizon. The desert air was cool and the stars shone bright above her. She could still hear the faint echoes of jets landing in the distance. The squadron leader approached quietly, holding 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to her and said, "You never stop teaching, do you?" She smiled. "Teaching is just another way of learning," she replied softly. He nodded, taking a sip. "You've changed this base. You know that?" She looked down for a moment, then back at the sky. "Maybe, but they changed too. They stopped trying to fly harder and started flying smarter. That's what matters." He studied her face for a moment before asking, "Do you ever miss being the one learning?" She chuckled quietly. "Every day. The sky is the best teacher there is. It never gets easier, and you just get better at listening." They sat there for a while in comfortable silence. The wind moved across the tarmac, carrying the faint smell of jet fuel and the hum of distant engines. After a few minutes, she stood up, brushing the dust from her flight suit. "Tomorrow's their last training run before evaluation," she said. "They'll do fine." He looked at her, curious. "You won't be flying with them?" She shook her head. "No, they don't need me up there anymore. They just need to trust themselves," he smiled. "That's what good leaders do. They teach others to lead." As she walked away toward the hangar lights, her shadow stretched long across the concrete. She paused once, turning her eyes toward the sky again. It was quiet, endless, and peaceful. For her, flying had never been about medals or recognition. It was about moments like this, seeing others find their strength, watching fear turn into confidence, and knowing she had played a small part in that change. Back inside the hangar, the young pilots were still talking excitedly, unaware that she was listening from the doorway. One of them said, "When I fly now, I can hear her voice in my head. Don't chase. Trust your team." Another laughed. "Same here. It's like she rewired how we think up there." She smiled quietly to herself and walked away, leaving them to their excitement. They didn't need her to remind them anymore. They had learned what mattered. As the night deepened, the base lights dimmed one by one. The sky above stretched wide and silent, holding the echoes of every flight, every lesson, every voice that had passed through its open air. And somewhere in that silence, she knew her job was done, at least for now.